Here we are with episode 6 of Address the Yes, the series where you guys ask questions and I try to answer them as best as possible. For example, this first question, is overclocking MSPaint safe? And I'm pretty sure it is. Your mileage may vary, but one thing I do like about MSPaint is that I actually use it sometimes to resize a lot of my images, especially coming from Photoshop, where some of these images can come out at like 15 megabytes and they come out as a PNG form, and you just drop them into Paint and then you resave as a JPEG and it drops it down to like 250 kilobytes, so you can then avoid some of those maximum upload limits on a lot of different sites. So MSPaint still is not too bad. Next question we got up here is doing surgery on a Grape safe? Depends on the grape, my friend. Depends on the grape. Next up here we have Ricky V. He says, hey Brian, I've always wondered about your comparison of USA versus Aussie prices. Maybe discuss that on your next Tech Yes Answers video. Other than that, good info here. I want to see car videos vroom vroom. So car videos, I will try and release something maybe at Christmas time. But in terms of Aussie versus USA pricing, I think they're pretty similar a lot nowadays. We talk about the tax structure. Some places in the US, I believe you don't have to pay taxes, and then there's variable tax rates, which aren't actually charged onto the final price that you see sometimes. And then you go into the checkout and you've got to pay those extra taxes. In Oz, everything on pricing has to include GST if it's a new shop retailer selling a graphics card, for example. And I do like this law better in Australia because at least you know exactly what you're going to pay before you check out, and you can kind of gauge prices. In terms of used parts, you don't have to pay GST on that because obviously a lot of people are just selling stuff in their backyard. But when it comes to places like Japan, for example, they currently have an 8% tax rate, and I think that's moving up to like 10% in 2019. And the problem with Japan, for example, is they don't charge tax on anything until you get to the final price. So they advertise all the prices without tax. And so if you're a foreigner and you go over there, you're like, wow, this stuff is so cheap. And then you get slugged with 8% on the end bill. And it sort of brings the tech to around the same levels. So in terms of Aussie versus US pricing, always just convert your money, 1 USD to AUD, and you'll find out roughly how much that is in comparative terms, because at least on face value, a lot of the stuff looks cheaper in the States, but when you convert it, Aussie pricing isn't too bad. I purchased a virtually mint HP Z400 for €200 shipped. It's the 6 RAM slot version and comes with 6 4GB sticks. Installed, storage was taken out, but otherwise everything appears to be OEM. I'll be out of the country for a few months, but I'll have a Xeon W3680 waiting for me when I get back. And since you've made it this far, did you know the Z400 was available with an all-in-one CPU water cooler? And it seems to be cooling the current CPU just fine with its rather quiet system. I haven't done any stress tests, but so far the CPU pulled a reported 144 watts and hasn't even hit the mid-50s. So I actually didn't know about this water cooler. Thanks for sharing that with me. I love sort of seeing cool stuff like that. In terms of the Z400s, I believe those motherboards inside are locked down, so you won't be able to overclock your CPU, at least from as far as I know. So you do want to, in that case, get the highest multiplier CPU you can buy and try and maybe stack it up with value for money. So the W3680 is definitely a good choice, and then put that water cooler on there and have happy days. I have dealt with Z400s in the past, and usually what I'll do is I'll just put a decent GPU in, because the motherboards support all those different graphics cards without secure boot or whatever. And then I'll put in like an i7 960 or 950 that I have lying around that a lot of people pretty much give away. And you got yourself a really good gaming PC, especially on a budget. Next up, Lucas Pago. He says, Brian, I've seen a post in the internet about editing BIOSes on old 60 series Intel chipsets. So that's like the H61 and stuff. To allow the motherboard to boot from the PCIe slot and recognize NVMe SSDs. Could you make a video about that? It'd be nice to use NVMe SSDs in older systems that don't support it natively. I just watched your video, is X58 still relevant in 2018? And you mentioned PCIe will solve every problem. That's why I'm asking that. Thanks in advance, great vids. So in terms of booting off NVMe, it's definitely possible. On my X79 Azeus board, I'm using a 2 terabyte Evo, and that's the boot drive, and it works absolutely flawless. It's absolutely amazing, but I did have to go get a hacked BIOS from a forum from someone who made that up. In terms of programming the BIOS itself, I'd have to learn how to do that and add in the NVMe options. It could be a little bit more difficult depending on the BIOS maker and the motherboard in question, but it's definitely possible to do. It just depends on how you're going to get that BIOS on that motherboard and whether it's going to work 100% with no faults. But in terms of breathing life back into these older chipsets, definitely. I think X79 at the moment, for example, is a real big sweet spot, having no disadvantages compared to the newer architectures and still giving such good performance. Next up here, Mike Lounder, he's following up from the previous episode where he said the 10 series had a problem with an update that messed up the display ports. It's a BIOS fix. So I'm guessing you update the VGA BIOS and that may help with your problem in the previous episode where the person was having some display port issues. I mentioned another suggestion, which is one that I'm personally coming into, a problem where the ports themselves from mining, they've sort of got a little bit of rust on them. So WD-40 and just keep reinserting that cable and it fixes it, absolutely no problems. Next up here, Caesar Intilla, he says, how can you say your X79 is your main editing rig when you have other newer hardware? Isn't it just months ago you showed videos of 2900 Threadrippers, 8th and 9th gen Intels, current 2nd gen Ryzen stuff, maybe just like really old systems, but would you rather prefer the modern and capable hardware to what you currently have right now? So this is a question I knew I was going to get asked sooner or later, and it relates to a few different things. The first being the passion of the channel. And as I said recently in the travel video, I'll put that up here if you haven't seen it already, everything I do on this channel just relates to what I love doing. And hopefully you guys enjoy watching the content too. And part of that X79 thing is that I love used price performance. It's just a big passion of mine, extracting the most out of the older stuff and showing that you really don't have to upgrade and waste money on newer hardware. But at the same time, I do like testing out all the newer stuff and seeing how it compares to the older stuff as well. Not to mention the companies, they want their products reviewed and they know that I'm more than capable of reviewing those products, whether it be giving it fancy, shiny B-roll and then overclocking it and also giving them feedback on their products behind the scenes. I do kind of beta tests, especially for motherboard companies. If there's problems before they release their motherboards, I do let them know, hey, fix this, fix that before it comes to market. These are some really cool things that go on with the new parts as well. And I guess when it really comes down to it, they both need each other. The new parts market will always keep the used price performance in check, and also the used price performance will always keep the new parts in check. So honestly, it's just a really cool trade-off, one that just is so balanced, and I love being at the forefront of that and also showing people how to get those really good deals. That stuff, it does really excite me. But also as well, there's something else, and that is the DDR3, the low CAS latencies. I do believe it just makes your system just that little bit snappier if everything else is considered. And so that's something we're going to be looking at soon with 1000 FPS camera, testing the X79 versus the 9900K versus the 2700X. Jared's text says, I say Azeus the same way. I spoke to someone who works there and they noticed they pronounced it the same. No regrets. Jared's tech, I love you right now. Next up, Dion Ellis says, I like this set. Is this the couch in the corner? RGB background lights look nice. Yes, it is the couch in the corner, and just we thought we'd do a little bit of a different setup where we don't have to rely on the condenser mic causing some little hissing and stuff like that. Plus, yeah, if you guys like it, we'll continue recording on this set here. Next up, the Outsider of Paradise says, hey tech, why don't you just go to the e-waste? They're dumping i-series computers with RAM nowadays. Very good question. I've tried in the past, especially on the Gold Coast. I've tried going around to different tips, and it's sad because they've got computers sitting there, like sometimes more than 10 computers sitting there. And it really frustrates me because apparently there's this law now where you can't take those computers. And it's just like, wow. I mean, people can use those computers, especially people who don't have money, like younger teens and stuff who have time on their hands could go pick those things up and sort of just, I guess, try and make a really cheap gaming PC. So it really sucks, the laws at the moment, especially in Queensland surrounding e-waste and being able to pick up those computers from the scrapyard. I don't know what other countries and their laws are like. I've definitely heard some people in the US have been getting some really good deals at e-waste centers because some of those centers will actually resell the parts at really low prices. So I'm looking forward to finding a place that does sort of do reselling. I have had some people email me from interstate saying that they've got parts and they could wholesale them to me and stuff like that. But in terms of me doing videos locally, maybe if I can get some special license or something, that'd definitely be something I'd look into. Next up, Jux Zeal says, can't wait for the water cooling vids, bud. Been flipping PCs for years myself, and as you can guess, I tend to lean more to previous gen parts. In turn, you can find really good water cooling gear secondhand for the older PC parts, so I've finally water cooled all but 2 of my builds with top-notch gear from EK, Danger Den, Barrow, to name a few. And Barrow is actually a really interesting company. They're on Aliexpress and they sort of do, I guess, high-end water cooling parts, but without all those fancy brand names associated with them. So I'm definitely looking into getting some Barrow parts. But that's RAM, VRM, CPUs, GPUs, and HDDs. No colored fluid, just deionized water with phaser-based corrosion inhibitor and PT Nuke biocide, and it's happy years. Not really any maintenance needed before the upgrade time, and it's cool and quiet at max OC, so great value. Thanks for sharing that tip. I mean, a lot of people have problems with custom water cooling gear and that they have to flush it out and clean it every so often. So I'm guessing a lot of people who actually just want to extract value for money out of water cooling will definitely take that into consideration. I have to say though, I'm really liking the way AMD is going with their new Zen and Navi series of chips, so it might be a new system for the first time ever soon. Keep up the great content, buddy, but take a break if you need it. We like the honest, upbeat vibes, and stay healthy. Thank you very much. And as for Ryzen, yes, I am looking forward to the next 7nm chips just as much as anyone else is. Whether they're going to be the 16 cores or 12 cores, I honestly think they're going to be 12 cores. I don't think we're ready for 16 cores just yet. And as I said in that previous video I did, I just think it's too much too soon from AMD. I mean, what are they going to do after that? They're not just going to put all their cards out on the table when they don't need to. So I think a 12 core part, if they release that, it would be so awesome. I'd personally probably change my main rig over to it as well. That's how much I'm looking forward to it. But in terms of AMD, they've definitely had a great year for 2018 with their CPUs. GPUs is an absolute mess. I've been speaking to people behind the scenes, and the GPU market, honestly, the cryptocurrency mining, it's even worse than I thought it was. And I thought it was really bad. So that's how bad cryptocurrency with the GPUs has messed up the market at the moment. Rage Against the Toy Machine says, what are your thoughts on Walmart's new overpowered line of gaming PCs? I'm not planning to buy one or anything. I'm just curious as to what your opinion on them. I call them overpriced. My sentiments exactly. I've been taking a look at what Bitwit and Gamers Nexus have been doing with these things, and they just look like they're complete garbage for the money. You know, skimping out like 8,700 on a H310. I mean, it's a little bit too much. Like, at least put a B360 motherboard in there, please. People deserve that if they're getting an 8,700. So there's just, you look at that, you're just like, damn, I would not recommend this to anyone. The case looks like it's absolute garbage. So for the money they're charging, I do expect a lot better. And since it's Walmart, I'm sure they could get some real good economies of scale deals going and give people some really good value. So it's just a shame to see them go down that route and say, hey, if you want a gaming PC with fancy lights and an 8700 and a GTX or RTX graphics card, we've got you covered, except they don't have you covered, and they're preying on those people that really, I guess, just walk into Walmart and don't have a whole lot of time. They're on their smartphone, they're like, oh, this might be a decent deal, when it's actually not a decent deal at all. Yes, definitely overpriced. Next up, few years behind, says, on the topic of Xeons on Aliexpress, you can find an E3 1280 V1 for 76 USD and a P67 motherboard for $65. E3 1280 is 4 cores, 8 threads Sandy, and it's clocked to 3.6 gigs on all cores out of the box. With P67 chipset, you can set the maximum 39 multiplier to all cores and it will give you 3.9 gigahertz. Then you can set bus speed a few megahertz higher, to say 105, and it'll give you 4.1 on pure performance. 1156 Xeons are better, but 4.1 easy overclock on Sandy just makes me happy. That's actually a really good tip. Thanks for that, few years behind, because yeah, if you can get a 4 gigahertz overclock, I guess on a non-overclockable CPU just via a few tweaks, then that's really good value for money. I love it when you can find those motherboards with a particular BIOS that allows you to hit that max multiplier speed. I know, for instance, in the past when I've had a Xeon I think it was the E3 1230 V2, the underappreciated. There was a B85 Pro Gamer motherboard, and you could set the max multiplier as well, only on one BIOS. So it's definitely cool what you can do with a motherboard and Xeon combo in terms of extracting performance. Next up, Than An Lee, he says, could you make a build with a Core i7 4720HQ and compare it to the normal 4770? I found it on Taobao, Aliexpress of China for $90. It has modded to use with normal MOBO like B85. I think Linus already did a video on that one. Isn't that the laptop CPU? It looks pretty cool. Like, I definitely want to get that testing done for you guys, but there's just so much on the plate at the moment. So maybe next year, if we've got some time, we'll take a look at that for you guys. But in terms of what it is and sort of like the practicality of it for the normal person, it is going to be one of those more real niche things. Next up, Grow Tacoma. He says, I love my gaming PC, but I edit videos for my job and fun for YouTube, and I use a Mac. I edit with Final Cut Pro, After Effects, and Premiere, and never get crashes. Just wish I could do tinkering on my iMac's hardware. Speaking of Premiere Pro and crashing, it's so crazy. I mean, it just seems like every time Adobe release an update, there's some weird thing that'll crash. For instance, we can force Adobe to crash if we set in, for instance, a constant power on the audio and drop that all the way to 0. And we can just replicate this easy, and bang, Adobe crashes. So definitely, if you're using Premiere Pro, do me a favor, go to the autosave settings and set it to at least 2 minutes. You'll thank me later. Next up, Rebel Without a Clue says, could you look at OEM X58 and X79 boards, as sometimes those deals pop up and the cooling in VRM is in question along with the overclockability. Would be interested due to you working on OEM machines a fair bit. We've actually got an X79 board that's come in. This is called the Running. And as always, I just check this stuff out. You check the feedback, and there's one Russian guy in there going hard. He's like, yep, this board is the one to get. E5 1650 V2, and then you get that to 4.2 gigahertz with some ECC registered memory. This could be the new meta for those people who want a 6-core 12-thread and living internationally and can't get access to Ryzen, for example. I'm definitely looking at this combo at the moment, and stay tuned because it might be that OEM board is sort of the better of the boards there. I did take a look at the One board for the X79. I thought that was, you'd have to be desperate to get on X79 to get that board because it just didn't make any sense. This one, on the other hand, actually does have quad channel memory. Next up, RJ Games. He says, I got a question. I have an Intel 980X and EVGA classified X58 motherboard. What would I gain from upping to one of the new 6-core Ryzen CPUs as to what I have now? And that's a really good question in itself, but it depends on what you're doing. If you've overclocked this CPU and you've got a GTX 1070, for example, and all you do is play games, I'd say there's absolutely no reason to upgrade at all. But if you're doing things like Adobe Premiere Pro, the Ryzen 5 2600, when you do overclock it, you will get some gains, plus you'll get some better power efficiency. So whether you need the productivity out of Ryzen or whether you just need to keep it for gaming, then overclocked for gaming, it'll perform pretty similar to a Ryzen 5 2600 even in 2018. If you want to check out more between these two CPUs in terms of gaming, I'll put a link up here for you guys. But also, of course, the Ryzen new series has USB front out and all those fancy features you'd get from newer chipsets. Of course, that may be a factor as well in terms of upgrading if you need those new features. Next up, Shampoo Time says, address the yes question. I think you may have answered this before, but do you do any local fan meetups, UPS public events, store promos, LANs? Risky, I know, with internet crazies. yeah, it's funny. We were kind of going to have a barbecue a while ago. It's just, I've honestly just been super busy. It's just too much. But I guess in ways, when I think about that, I will be making a fan meeting probably after Christmas, maybe in end of January. That'd be great, just to all meet up on the Gold Coast, have a barbecue, have some drinks, talk to all you guys. So I'll definitely see what I can do in terms of that. In terms of just the busyness itself, I guess the way I look at it is like, hey, I've sort of worked on YouTube for so long. It's been actually, and you guys as well, have been so loyal to me that I don't want to let you down now. Things are starting to go pretty well. So it's like, I'm just going to put my foot to the floor on the accelerator and just keep the awesome content coming for you guys. So if you've got suggestions too, be sure to drop a comment below. Next up, God of Sand says, I bought a black reference design Zotac GTX 1070. It has a weird problem on my main rig where neither the motherboard nor Windows will detect the GPU. However, I have my late uncle's PC and it works absolutely fine on that machine. The only conclusion I can come to is that something is wrong with the motherboard itself. Any suggestions? And yes, it is the motherboard and it's to do with secure boot problems. I definitely have come into a lot of these headaches with OEM boards like HP's and Dell's, for instance, and they just won't support NVIDIA graphics cards to boot. But if you can get into the BIOS with for instance, an old AMD card, which I find usually works on any single motherboard, then you can go into the secure boot options and try and play around with those settings and then change that and then try and put your GTX 1070 back in and then see if it boots up. If it doesn't have that option, then unfortunately, you're generally SOL. So yeah, get another motherboard if that's the case. Next up here, we got Kwai Song. He says, great and awesome content as always. I have a question for the next Yes episode. I have quite a lot of headphones. I'm weird. I like to keep them. Not weird at all, man. That's, I guess you're just maybe an audiophile. They consist of Audio-Technica ATH M20s, Aventry Audition, Logitech G433, Razer Electra, and so on. But I'm wondering if buying and spending money on an amp will be a good idea. Many of them saying an amp will help us to get the best out of these headphones. Just wondering if they'll make any difference for the headphones I have. In terms of the headphones you currently have, they do look like they're sort of mid-range, more budget-orientated options. Depends on what you're using at the moment. If you're using them with a motherboard with good onboard audio, for example, then you unfortunately won't get much of a difference. Generally, amps where they make the biggest difference, especially a DAC amp combo, is when you've got higher end headphones that are harder to drive, for instance, Ortho Dynamics. But of course, they will make a little bit of a difference. And if you see yourself definitely stepping it up in terms of better headphones in the future, then getting a DAC amp solution now that's a good one is always an investment for the future, especially if you like listening to music. It's always a trade-off, I guess, with anything. Like we've got PCs, for example, match a good GPU with a good power supply, good CPU, match a budget GPU with the budget power supply and a budget CPU. I guess that's like the tiers of PC parts. You've got the tiers of audio where you want to match all your good gear and not have one really bad link in the chain. Next up here, Line of Truth Ministries. He says, I love the channel and your style, very personable. I recently switched from Mac and built my own PC, and your channel has been a great blessing. My family and I spent a year in Australia and your accent brings back good vibes. Blessings. Line of Truth Ministries, thank you so much for this comment. It's the reason why I love doing YouTube, is just reading comments like these. Hope you have a Merry Christmas and all the best. Next up, Fire Falcon says, could you please do some more dual socket or quad socket Intel Xeon AMD Overton or EPIC videos? Actually, I'm not too keen on doing dual socket or even quad socket videos because in the past I've used a dual socket Xeon board as my main PC for quite a while. And its perks were that, of course, it was great maximum performance, especially for the money. But the negatives were that there was noticeable latency over a single overclocked CPU. And so that's why I went back to a single socket solution, because of those issues. Plus there was other issues where games wouldn't work properly some of the time, and the FPS was actually lower compared to that of a single CPU variant of those same CPUs in dual socket mode. So in terms of me doing future content with dual sockets, I don't really believe in it. And I don't think the majority of single and desktop users, especially power users that need to get a lot of things done at once, would benefit from a dual socket CPU solution. Next up, Grey Wolf Tower says, another great video, always great material from you. Hope that thumb is healing well. Yeah, it is healing well, I guess. There's this really weird bump of scar tissue, and it's actually really annoying to try and use my thumb like I used it before I cut it. So if you guys have any good tips and tricks that work well for reducing that scar tissue, then I'd love reading your comments on that. Next up, Shah Ahmed says, hey Brian, Peter, Bailish, mustache, and goatee, how's that for an idea? We can always give it a go, thanks. And that about wraps up this episode of Address the Yes. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, then be sure to hit that like button. Of course, if you have any questions that need to be answered in depth, then be sure to drop a comment in the comments section below, as I love reading your thoughts and opinions as always. Also, if you want to grab yourself some merch, then the link for that is in the description below too. Or if you enjoy the content coming out every single day and you want to support us just that little bit more, then the Patreon link is there too. And I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.